Singing Dutchman Productions. Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends, old and new, and have honest conversations. Today I welcome David Hunsicker to the Front Porch, someone that I've gotten to know through social media, probably more than any other way. I got to physically meet him for the first time this summer at the Kutztown Folk Festival. I think he has an awesome multicultural background story that I can't wait to share with everybody here today. So David, welcome to the Front Porch.
Thanks, Doug. It's great to be here with you.
All right, I want to start with this question because our connection, the way we became connected, was through Pennsylvania Dutch stuff online. And you have a very Pennsylvania Dutch last name, Hunsicker. Could we talk a little bit about that? Where did you grow up, and what connection did Pennsylvania Dutch have to you in your childhood and in your life?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as you said, Hunsicker is a very Pennsylvania Dutch last name. I grew up in rural Lehigh County, and basically my family has lived in that same little plot for, about 275 years. I grew up, the first 5 years of my life I spent on the Handwork family homestead, which, still has buildings that were erected in 1769. And so I grew up in the shadow of, an old Pennsylvania German farmhouse. And my aunt, who lives just a mile from there, she owns the property, which is the original Hunsicker homestead from the 1750s. So very much tied to that part of my identity. And, growing up, my best friends were my cousins. And, some of the highlights of growing up were things like doing work on the farm. And I have to admit, I was one of the younger cousins, so I didn't do a whole heck of a lot of work. But we would get together, we would bale hay, we would bale straw, help my grandfather on the farm. And we'd get together afterwards and have a great Pennsylvania Dutch meal and play football in the yard. And, I can't think of a more idyllic way to grow up than
that was the exact
what
word when you were saying all that. That's the word that was in my mind. Like, what an idyllic childhood. That's awesome that you got to experience.
It really
that.
was. Yeah.
So let's go in a different direction. So you grew up in this Norman Rockwell style of painting. Where did you go after high school? What happened next?
Well, so I'm actually going to start my story before leaving high school. Having had that kind of, idyllic, upbringing in this Pennsylvania Dutch environment where, I heard Pennsylvania Dutch spoken around me all the time. But like I said, I was one of the younger cousins, and even my older cousins didn't really speak Pennsylvania Dutch. I picked up phrases along the way, but it was generally the language that my grandparents spoke at home when they didn't want us to understand. I mean, my elder aunts and uncles spoke it. And, when we would go to my grandparents' place and they were playing Haws or something, with their friends at the table, they'd be chattering in Pennsylvania Dutch. So I had this desire to understand what they were talking about. And I took 4 years of German in high school. And had the opportunity with my high school to go to Germany for a short trip, and it was like 10 days or something like that, and it was absolutely wonderful. And so my junior year of high school, I applied to the Rotary Club to have a year abroad. They had a year abroad, study abroad program. And so I applied to that with the intention of going to Germany for a year and, really solidifying my German language skills and that sort of thing. And they do this kind of reveal of where you're going to go at the Christmas party that they hold every year. And they had given us a list of like 30 countries, and you're supposed to rank the top 15. So I had Germany at the top, and I think Norway was second, and I had Australia third, on down the list. Long story short, At the Christmas party, I open up the little envelope, which has a pin with my name on it. The pin is actually a map of the United States. On the back side is a little sticker, and it says Turkey. I'm like, huh, Turkey. My mom initially was a little bit taken back. She's like, wait, he needed to go to Germany. That's what he signed up for. And I'm like, actually, hold on. This is good. I like this idea of going to Turkey. And part of that story is I had been exploring my faith, um, and had become particularly attracted to Islam. And so when in going to Germany, I had already had it in the back of my head that there's a lot of German Turkish guest workers living in Germany, and I wanted to explore Islam with them. And the way I look at it was like God said, no, you're going to do it directly, and you're going to go to Turkey and spend a year there. So that's what I did. I went and I lived with a host family in Turkey, went to a Turkish high school, learned to speak Turkish quite well. And then when I came back to the United States, finished out my senior year, and I went on then after I graduated. I studied first at New York University for a year, and for a rural Pennsylvania Dutch kid, that was the dumbest thing I could have possibly done, was go to New York City. Like I intended to do a degree program there in Near Eastern languages and civilizations to continue with the Turkish, to continue picking up Arabic and other Middle Eastern languages. And so I did that for a year. That didn't work out. And then, I went to another big metropolis. I went to Cairo, Egypt, for several months, to the American University there, and also to work on my Arabic, etc. But I also wasn't happy there. Also, a bit of a huge city, and honestly, I felt it was I in my 19-year-old mind, I also thought it was going to be a lot more like Turkey, and actually Egypt and Turkey are very different, culturally, certainly linguistically, but I wasn't really happy there. Eventually went to the University of Michigan, which is one of the few places in the United States that at that time had an undergraduate Islamic studies program. And so I finished out my undergraduate career there. And it was really great. I thought about going immediately into graduate school, but things didn't work out. I didn't get the funding I had hoped for to go straight from undergraduate into a graduate program. Um, but I did, in my senior year of college, I met a visiting professor from Turkey who was a specialist in the Turkic languages of the former Soviet Union. Specifically, he was an expert in Azerbaijani, Azeri, but he also knew Uyghur and Uzbek and several other Turkic languages of the former Soviet Union. And he came and he wanted to improve his English. And we ran into one another and I said, hey, I'll help you with your English if you can maybe tutor me a little bit in one of these other Turkic languages. And that soon turned into us sitting in a coffee shop in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and him just telling me stories about his travels in the former Soviet Union. This was 1992, 93. So the Iron Curtain had just come down. Most of these countries had just received their independence from the Soviet Union. And so it was, a wide open space for exploration and study that hadn't been available just a few years prior to that. So I decided once I did go to graduate school that that's the part of the world that I wanted to focus on. Fast forward a few years, I spent a few years working in a bookstore. I got into a graduate program in Near Eastern languages and civilizations at the University of Washington out in Seattle, which is one of the few places in the country that has taught Turkic languages for now over like 40, probably 50 years.
All right, David, there is so much to unpack there, and I want to rewind a little bit because the first question that came to my mind when you were telling that story is I'm familiar with the Rotary Exchange Program. I've had quite a lot of students that have done that at my high school themselves. Actually, right now I have a girl from Colombia in my German class who's on the Rotary Exchange with us. But okay, so you're this Pennsylvania Dutch kid. Here's the first question I've wondered about. You said that you were interested in learning more about Islam. As a kid growing up in the Lehigh Valley, or in Lehigh County, in the time period that you did on a Pennsylvania Dutch farm, agrarian setting, how did you even gain any kind of knowledge about Islam? And what about it piqued your interest?
Yeah, so I mean, the short answer to that question is I was a nerdy kid with a lot of questions. And so I would spend a lot of time in the library reading books, and I explored a variety of different faith traditions. And
so, one quick question. Growing up, did you grow up in a faith community?
So I grew up in the UCC church. We went to a Union church, which for Pennsylvania Dutch are very common. One half being UCC, or as Reformed as they used to call it, and the other half Lutheran, and switching off at different times each week, and/or switching off weeks of who goes to church, and I would go to Sunday school, and honestly, my exploration of Islam, I feel it was a direct outgrowth of my personal attachment to the Bible and the stories that I read there. Like I said, a nerdy kid with a lot of questions, started reading the Bible, starting as you do from the beginning of the book with Genesis. But I will admit, I jumped around a lot, and spent a fair amount of time, reading, Kings and Chronicles, and the parts where my namesake David appeared, and had a real attachment to the biblical story. But at the same time, I felt that there was a disconnect between that Old Testament religion that I was reading about and what I was experiencing as a Christian in the church. Things like dietary laws and observing the Sabbath, or all of these different things which are so very prevalent in the Old Testament, that I felt like, well, there's something more we need to be doing to basically live out God's plan for us. It has to be something more active. And at the same time, I also struggled with the concept of the Trinity. When I would read the New Testament, I was reading with a lens of the Old Testament prophets. And when I would read about Jesus, it was, as one of God's prophets, not as the Son of God, not as, one part of a triune God of the Trinity. And so that didn't sit well with me, honestly. And I felt I needed to explore other avenues. And, in my reading, I came across Islam, and the first time I read about it, no drinking, no pork, no dating. Like, who's going to sign up for that? I mean, particularly as a Pennsylvania Dutchman, I mean, that makes no sense. So but I kept on coming back to it, and eventually, what solidified things for me was I bought a copy of a translation of the Quran at the bookstore, and just brought it home, and I started reading. And it was as though it was speaking directly to me, and it was answering the questions that I had. It established rituals and requirements that guide the daily life of a Muslim. It spoke directly to the question of the Trinity, and Islam is a Unitarian faith. We believe in the oneness of God, and that is the greatest commandment. And it's the greatest commandment that Jesus quotes in Mark 12:29, where that the Lord God is one God, and that's the central theology of Islam as well. So with that, I was like, okay, yes, this is what I need to believe. And so, the rest is history. So that
Can I ask you how that conversation went down when you told your parents?
yes, great question. So, like I said, I've been exploring for a while, nerdy kid, lots of books. I had gone through all sorts of phases. So, like, my parents at that point were like, okay, he's a Muslim this week. He was a Buddhist last week. We'll see what he is next week and just kind of take it from there. But, the exchange experience really helped to kind of solidify that, both for me personally, because it allowed me to explore my faith in Turkey, separate from my family. But then my family also had the opportunity at the end of that year to come and spend 3 weeks in Turkey. We traveled the country. They got to meet my host family, and they got to see that all that stuff that permeates the news is not what Islam is all about, and that it's God-fearing people who have families and love their families and love their neighbors, and that's what Islam is for most Muslims around the world on a daily basis. And so that acceptance of that experience, like my parents seeing that firsthand, really helped them to be accepting. And I couldn't ask for a more accepting family environment in terms of my faith choice. I mean, my aunts, uncles, cousins. I mean, I'll give you just another quick example. At one of my cousin's weddings, after I had come back from Turkey and had converted to Islam, and um, I went out to pray during the wedding reception, and I came back in, and my Pennsylvania Dutch grandmother said, "Where'd you go?" I said, "Well, Grandma, Mammy, I said, Mammy, I have, we have these 5 daily prayers, and I had to go out to do my prayer and come back." She said, "Oh, that's so nice."
David, I think you're very lucky because I know that there are a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch families that would, well, some of them probably would have essentially shunned you from the family. I mean, I know that for a fact. There are those
Mhm.
families out there. So I find it very heartening to hear that you had such a positive experience with your family, because there's a lot of families that couldn't take the news or even try to understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not understand Islam, but understand your conversion, your choice. So I mean, kudos to your family for being welcoming and warm and being a family. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't be more blessed in that respect. And you're absolutely right. I have seen how it has played out differently, for others, not just converts to Islam, but various other faiths or things. And people would challenge my parents as well and say, "Aren't you worried about your son's soul?" And my mom would say, like, he doesn't drink. He prays 5 times a day. He doesn't womanize. Like, no, I'm not worried about my son's soul. So those kinds of reactions, like you said, are not necessarily typical, but it's also a function, I think, of when I became Muslim. This was the late '80s, and it was before. I mean, the press and the media is what it is, and there was already, all sorts of stuff about the Iranian Revolution and what that represented, and all of these other things. But there was Islam wasn't demonized quite as much as it would be after 9/11.
well. Can
Um,
I can I ask you then? So you're by that point, by 9/11, you're over 10 years a Muslim. Um, how did you how did that attack affect you from the personal slash faith perspective? Were you attacked at all? Maybe not necessarily physically, but did you get blowback being a Muslim in the United States right after 9/11?
So interestingly, I was not in the United States when 9/11 took place. I was living in Uzbekistan in the former Soviet Union. And I I had just it's really interesting because I was flying out of JFK to go back to Uzbekistan that summer after having been home to visit family. And as we were crossing the bridge on the way to uh, to JFK, I looked over at the Twin Towers, and I was just kind of soaking it in. And I don't know why I took that moment to really just soak it in, but as we all know, just a couple months later, they were attacked and brought down, and I had, like I said, I was in Uzbekistan, and I got the news via an email from one of my friends who had studied in Uzbekistan with me and had gone home to the States, and he emailed us like, you should turn on the news. Something's going on, in New York. And, um, I did. And I was watching CNN, which was available to me there. And then, other Americans, particularly Peace Corps volunteers who were working there, who didn't necessarily have access to CNN because they were, living with Uzbek families or in, somewhat rural areas, whatever. They heard the news trickle out, and I started inviting them. I said, come to my apartment, and we'll watch this together as a group of Americans. And so it really, it helped us to have that community of being Americans together in that moment. But because I wasn't in the U.S. and I certainly didn't experience any immediate blowback, and actually what ended up happening was that soon thereafter, because I was there doing research and language training, I had a lot of contacts in the Muslim community in Uzbekistan. And so the embassy reached out to me, the US embassy, and said, hey, we would like to reach out to the Muslim community there to explain, that we as the United States government understand, that this was not an attack by Islam or Muslims, but it was an attack by criminal terrorists, and that we are going to, take actions against them in Afghanistan. And this is not a war on Islam, but again, it's a war on terrorism and terrorists. And we want to be able to explain that. But we don't have contacts in this community. So would you facilitate those meetings with the religious community in Uzbekistan, which I did. And
that is an unbelievable ask. From my perspective, listen to you tell that story. Here's the government like, hey, Dave, we don't really know you all that well, but we want you to be the lead contact between the faith community of this country and the United States government. Like, were you, like, when you got that call, was it a sense of excitement that you were given this responsibility? Was it a fear in the sense like, my God, there's a lot, there's a lot on my shoulders here? Or, how did you take that phone call, and how did you even then start that journey to having those conversations with those locals?
So, it actually wasn't as outlandish an ask as it seems, and I can understand you hearing this story for the first time, how that comes. But it's very small community of Americans in Uzbekistan. It's not like the Americans in Germany or the Americans even in a place like Turkey. Uzbekistan had been, independent for all of 10 years at that point, and had, was still not opened up to the world. It was still a very tightly controlled country. And so there was a very small expat community. And one of the guys who was working at the embassy actually happened to be somebody I studied the Turkmen language with in another, at Indiana University out in Bloomington at one point. And so he and I had a personal relationship, and he reached out and he talked to his folks. He's like, hey, Dave has these connections. He's been here for a couple of years. Maybe he can help us out. And again, I mean, because I was kind of straddling these two worlds, it just seemed natural for me to, do that. I mean, it was what I felt I was being called to do, both as an American as well as a Muslim. And
I was wondering if there was a sense of almost patriotism there in this mission, so to speak, that you were sort of sent on. Okay, all right.
Yeah, without question. And it became not just a calling for that moment, but over 20 years later, I'm working for the U.S. government, and have been for most of those 20 years since that point.
I couldn't make a better transition. Thanks so much, Dave. That was perfect. So, can we talk about your current job? Because I find this fascinating as well. I think everybody else will too. So, what are you currently doing? And I know that we debriefed each other before we started, so you might not hear every fact I want to know because of sensitive material, things like that. But tell us about your job, please.
Sure. And there's very little about my job that is sensitive. I should just say that up front. But I work for the United States Agency for International Development, often known as USAID. And within that, I work for the Center for Conflict and Violence Prevention.
Okay,
And
as an average taxpayer,
Mhm.
what, in a sentence, what does that agency, what is the mission of that agency?
So we are the main assistance arm of the U.S. government internationally. So we work to promote economic prosperity and stability in countries around the world, so as to protect our own national interests and national security. I mean, the basic idea is that if we help other countries have a prosperous and peaceful life, that will help to maintain our peace and prosperity at home. I mean, as we've seen with COVID, for example, things that start in one place don't just end in those places, right? And so a health emergency in China can become a health emergency in the United States. As we saw with 9/11, instability in a place like Afghanistan, which allows a terrorist group to take root, doesn't just become a problem in that part of the world. It becomes a problem here at home as well. And so USAID works to basically prevent those problems from ever reaching our shores. We're limited in what we can do. Ultimately, we can't get ahead of everything, but I like to say that a lot of the work that we do, is to keep things from ever getting into the headlines. It's to stop problems before they ever reach our shores. And it really is about the generosity of the American people. Being able to support countries that require assistance in a variety of different areas, whether it's health or education or civil society development, dealing with their internal conflicts, which is the piece that I focus on, and helping those countries with U.S. taxpayer money to deal with some of those issues. Yeah, that's it in short.
So you are right now, one of the things that you're working with is a topic that I think a lot of Americans think they know about, but I bet we don't really know about it. So could you talk about that, please?
Sure. Yeah. So I work on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay, there you go. I mean, that's like for most of us that has been something that's been in the news our whole lives. When I think back to growing up as a kid in the 80s, I remember hearing about Palestine and Israel. And of course, if you study history, then you're going back, into the war that was in the 60s and all of this fallout still today. And I think the average American thinks that is a issue that'll never solve or never get solved. I mean, how many presidents have tried? So you are smack dab in this, and tell me about it, please.
So I'm a student of history, as I think has been reflected in part in part of our conversation up to this point. And so I like to approach things within that larger historical timeline. And you talked about how various presidents have tried to address this, and they try to address it in a moment in time, but it has to be understood in the larger arc of history, of course, right? And yes, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, has been an ongoing one certainly for our lifetimes and going back further than that. But it's within the larger frame of history, it's still relatively young. I mean, there are conflicts that have gone on and evolved and shaped over centuries and millennia, and this is part of that larger arc of history, but it's also anchored in the time in which we live. And the approach that we take in our work as an assistance arm of the US government is to work with those civil society actors in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in Jerusalem, and in Israel to try to find ways to come together around issues of common interest. And we as human beings all have things that we care about. And one of the key ways in which we can resolve conflicts is when we find those things that we care about together as communities in conflict and try to come around those issues as a stepping stone towards establishing a peaceful coexistence. And obviously the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is incredibly complicated, and there are identity issues, there are land issues, there are political issues, there are security issues. But what we focus on is on finding ways to bring people together in a way that respects everybody's dignity, that makes everybody feel as though they're coming to the table as equals, and to find ways to create a community and to create a culture of peace in the midst of a lot of bloodshed and conflict. And the main idea behind that at the end of the day is that there is this constituency for peace, that when peace comes, they're going to be able to help to carry it forward. They're not going to bring peace on their own. And we just need to make sure that they continue to grow as a community. And when bad things happen, when the conflict strikes home and violence hits home, that they're able to basically pick themselves up, brush themselves off, and keep on going with the good work of trying to bring about peace in the future.
So from an outsider's perspective, someone that just follows this casually through the news, I get the sense that these two sides don't even want to talk to each other. Now you're on the inside. Is there truth to that, or are there people? I'm sure there are people, but as a general statement, are both sides trying at least to do something?
I mean, there's the political level, and then there's the popular level. And on the political level, they continue to have talks, and then talks break down, and there isn't a whole lot of official will, I think, on either side to really push forward a groundbreaking new peace agreement. And like you said, every new administration comes in and has a new initiative, and those initiatives are important because eventually some pieces of them stick, right? And it establishes a new starting point that can be built upon. And but there are obviously two steps forward, one step back a lot of time on the political level, and at the popular level as well. I mean, because there's so little movement at the political level, it's hard for people to really envision a future where they might live together. So it makes it really difficult. But that doesn't stop a really determined community of folks from continuing to know what is that they have to have peace at some point. You can't live in perpetual conflict. And they come to an understanding of the other side as, being human beings with, concerns for their families just like they have, and that they want a better future for their sons and daughters, and they're willing to do the unpopular thing and come together with folks from the other side to try and move that agenda forward. So it is a relatively small peace building community that's there, but it's incredibly resilient. And that's what we as the US government, through the programs that we have appropriated to us by Congress. The program that I work on between the Israelis and the Palestinians is the congressional appropriation. Congress says this is important to do, and we certainly agree and do what we can to move that agenda forward, to create an environment where peace can take root when the time is right.
All right, so here's a off-the-wall question for you. Given your background and this work that you do, let's look at the United States real quickly. I'd like your opinion from someone on the inside of working with a very high-stress communities where they're actually sometimes will shoot rockets at each other and kill each other. So, I mean, from right now in the United States, we are a society pretty divided, and both sides, whether you're blue, red, purple, whatever, there seems to be a lot of anger, tension, not to the point where we're shooting rockets at each other, but from your perspective as someone that works to build peace, have here okay, I'm going to ask it. Have we as a society gone too far? Or is, in your opinion, do you still think there is way for us to build this rift that we have in this country, whether it's politically, socially, whatever, this anger, this angst, or whatever it is? Do you think we can still fix that?
Well, I'm gonna start by saying what I probably should have said a little bit earlier, that the opinions that I will express are belong wholly to myself and do not necessarily reflect those of my employer, the United States for International Development, or the U.S. government. These are my
Duly
personal.
noted.
But I mean, yes, absolutely. These cleavages that we see in our society are ones that we can see in other societies as well. I mean, the United States of America is a great country, but we are not exceptional in terms of our immunity to these conflict dynamics that we see in other parts of the world, and we need to be wary about what the consequences can be. I mean, we have had civil wars in this country, starting with our own revolution, which was a civil war between those that wanted independence and those that didn't. And the Civil War from 1861 to 1865 that we commonly call the Civil War. And we've brought ourselves to the brink on various other periods in our history as well. And we have to make an effort to identify what the issues are and use the institutions that we have available to us. What has made us resilient as a nation and has helped us to weather some of these past crises have been the institutions that we have set up in this country, with checks and balances that don't just put power in the hands of a few, but that allow different voices to rise to the top and be part of the national conversation, and ultimately that we listen to one another and we come to compromise. And that's what we're not doing right now. I feel, as a country, is we're not listening well to one another. We're not displaying empathy, where we're understanding where the other side is coming from, and understanding the fears that may be driving some of the political behaviors that we see. And so I think, as a nation, we need to step back, take a breath, and have some serious conversations about what the issues are that really divide us, and think of a way that we can get through it. I mean, the 24-hour news cycle doesn't help us. Everything is either breaking news or clickbait, or it's designed to get us worked up, whereas we need to have an approach that is a little bit more humble and recognizes that we do have issues that we need to work through as a country, and it can get dangerous if we don't address them and we let them get out of control. And that we take that time to be empathetic to those who may have an opinion different from ours, and take the time to listen and talk and work through them, through the institutions that God and the founding fathers have granted us.
Yeah, the two things that stick out from what you said for me personally is one that I hark all the time, is the point of just listening. It's one thing to talk, but and to have a conversation. We say we'll have a conversation, but a conversation, have a true conversation, you have to listen to the other person. You don't have to believe in what they're saying or necessarily agree with them, but at least listen. And I think there's where, personally, me speaking, I think that's where we really fall. And I couldn't agree with you more on the influences and the outside pressures that are put upon the society. Either it's through social media or the regular media or any of that. And I think the stepping back and taking a breath is such a powerful movement that I mean, think about it in your normal life. If you're having a bad day or something's not going right, what's the best thing to do? Just step back, take a deep breath, think about what's going on, and you can like reset yourself a little bit. And I think as a country, I agree with you. As a country, we could use a couple deep breaths.
For sure.
Okay, David, oh man, I could talk to you for hours about this stuff because it's funny. All too often, I think most Americans too, we only look at the world through our lens, period, and that's it, like through the American perspective, and not necessarily saying that other perspectives don't count, but I mean that's what kind of we're programmed to do. And you're in this very unique situation and your unique story where you have been able to look at the world through multiple different perspectives, whether it was your own growing up, your time in Turkey, that gave you that perspective, your time in Uzbekistan, and now floating between cultures and countries because you travel a lot as well with your job. I would imagine that you see things very differently, and you're able to make that physical step back and look at the bigger picture, where the average American, I think, never gets the experience to do something like that, or doesn't even know, I don't know how to do that. Maybe I don't want to make it sound like we're dumb, but if you're never given that opportunity or chance to step back and say, okay, let's think about this, or let's think about this, and if you've never done it, it's hard to do, right? Just like anything else. So I applaud you for the work that you're doing, and hopefully your agency can be the ones that finally bring peace to Palestine and Israel. That's a heavy job, but at least we're working. That's the other thing. Like we could have just thrown our hands up and walked away long already and said the hell with this, and we didn't. And like you talked about perseverance, you have to keep at it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, at the end of the day, we as Americans have a responsibility, understanding that we are connected to the rest of the world, to get a greater understanding. I mean, and yes, not everybody can travel. I am blessed in the work that I do, that I am able to go to a lot of different countries and get a different perspective. But, I certainly encourage Americans who can to travel to diverse places. I mean, the world, again, the news can scare you about everything that's going on out there, but like most people around the world are just like us. They want a better future for their kids. They want to live in peace. They want to have their kids get good jobs and prosper in their lives. And that becomes so immediately apparent when you have the opportunity to meet with folks. And it's true across the board, every culture, right? I mean, it may manifest itself differently. But the other thing I'll say is like diversify your news sources. Like, Deutsche Welle has a website and they have their perspective on news. I love the BBC. There are other news outlets out there as well. I mean, we would do ourselves credit if we diversify our news sources and get various perspectives that aren't just our own and aren't just the American perspective on issues.
Yeah. Well, David, we close every episode out with 10 quick questions. Are you ready? I can't wait to hear some of your answers for these. Okay. Number one, what is your morning drink of choice?
Black coffee.
Okay. I figured since you spent, but your time in Turkey is both coffee and tea country, right? Culture?
That is correct. And their tea is a good strong tea, so it might as well be coffee.
So now you've spent time in Uzbekistan. What's there? Are they a tea country or are they a coffee country?
They're very much a tea country. Yes. Yeah.
And is it the same kind of like that strong Middle Eastern tea?
It's not. It's a very light tea, and oftentimes green tea versus black tea, which we're more used to in the U.S.
Okay. All right. Number two, who is a go-to musical artist or group for you?
So I'm going to cheat a little bit on this. Well, of course, after the Broken Spokes, which I listen to music primarily in my car when I'm driving, places, go to work back and forth to DC on a somewhat regular basis. And, when I listen to music, I listen to uh, traditional country music as a genre. Like I have a few go-to artists. Like I like Waylon Jennings and like Don Williams, and I like Merle Haggard, and those are kind of my go-to ones. Buck Owens when I need a little pick me up. But yeah, that's the kind of music that I love, and I think it harkens me back to my grandmother's kitchen when I was a kid, and that was what was on the radio.
If anybody needs a pick me up, you are right. A good Buck Owens and the Buckaroos will
Absolutely.
put a smile on your face and a tap in your toe.
For sure.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 3. What movie can you watch over and over again and it doesn't get old?
The Longest Day. I don't know if you're
Oh,
familiar with it,
yes.
but it's a World War II movie about the D-Day invasion, and it takes both a German perspective and an American and British perspective as well. And it's just star-studded. It's got like Robert Mitchum and John Wayne and Richard Burton, and I mean it's just a young Sean Connery. Like it's just amazing.
That movie was so I'm big into classic films. I really like classic films a lot. And I saw that film when I was a kid, and it was the first World War II movie. And I was also into war movies. So I mean, I was used to seeing that genre of film. But that I remember distinctly that was the first World War II movie I saw that also had the German perspective, where where the people were actually speaking
German,
real German with the English subtitles across the bottom, and that really that sticks in my mind the first time I saw that, like, because I knew it was an American movie, so but to see the whole story, or at least more of the story told than just again speaking to different perspectives, and no, that is a great film. If you haven't seen it, it really is good. I agree. Okay, number 4. What is the last thing that you read?
the last thing that I mean, I constantly have books in the state of being half read, and don't get finished. But the last book that I finished was a book called The Orientalist, which is a biography of Lev Nussbaum, who was a Jew born in Baku, Azerbaijan, but then went on to transform himself into Asad Bey, an Oriental writer, and he was writing in German in Germany, converted to Islam, and lived out this really fascinating life where, like in Baku, his mother was part of the revolutionary movement in this what became the Soviet Union, and personally knew Stalin. And he goes after the Bolshevik Revolution. He has to go to Central Asia and then to Constantinople and then into Europe, where he becomes a very prolific writer in German, both fiction and nonfiction. But because he has a Jewish background in the Nazi period, he has to reshape himself and starts writing under another pseudonym, and ultimately dies in fascist Italy in the mid 40s. But it's just a fascinating read, and and there's just so many parallels with my own life that it was one of the Amazon recommended it to me, and I'm like, yeah, that looks interesting, and I grabbed it. And
sounds like that guy needs a biographical film made of his life. Holy cow!
Yeah.
Holy cow! Okay, number 5. What's your favorite pizza topping?
Jalapenos.
Okay. All right. Question about cultural thing here. So in Uzbekistan, do they eat something similar to a pizza? Like, do they have their own version of it, or are you going to get Italian style pizzas in Uzbekistan?
You're going to get Italian style pizzas in Uzbekistan.
Okay.
Yeah, they have pizza places now, and you can go, get a pizza. I'm trying to think if there's anything. I mean, yeah, there's very few parallels to a pizza. I mean, they are a very, they have a dough culture. I mean, their bread is amazing, and it's freshly baked bread every day. You go down to the bakery and you get your
So
bread and all that.
is it more of a flat bread, or is it more of like a European style loaf?
It's a round loaf, so it's more of a flat bread, but it's it tends to be like about an inch and a half
Oh,
thick
okay.
around the outside. And you can certainly use the dough to make like a pizza kind of thing. But yeah, they don't have they don't have something analogous to a pizza that can think of right of the. Of course, as soon as I'm done here, my wife is going to tell me that I'm wrong. My wife is Uzbek, and will tell, well, you forgot about something else, and I probably did forget about something else.
All right, number 6, laying on the beach or going for a hike?
Oh, going for a hike without question. I
Yeah,
hate the beach.
yeah, okay.
I love the woods. I love the mountains. I
Yeah,
love
you're
hiking.
very active with your sons in the Boy Scouts, right?
That's correct.
I've seen
Yep.
that on social media. Okay, good, good, good. All
Yeah.
right, number 7. Oh, I'm great. Here we go. You've invited me over for dinner. What are you making?
Well, if I'm making it, you're getting hamburgers because that's about all I'm capable of.
Okay.
My wife is the cook in the family, and she's an amazing cook. And she would make you a very nice traditional Uzbek meal, which
I oh hmm.
yeah, which would probably consist of what's called they call it plov or osh, which is a rice dish, and with meat and carrots and sometimes raisins as well. It's really tasty, and maybe she would make you dumplings as well, which is also it's just amazing stuff.
I love trying new cultural foods, and I've never had Uzbeki food, so I'm there. I am there. You've traveled a lot, so this next question I'm kind of curious about. What is a dream vacation destination for you?
So uh, ironically, the answer to that question is I would love to spend more time in Germany and Switzerland, where my ancestors come from. Like I said, I made a short trip there in high school. I've gone for other very short trips, like had a weekend or so that I was able to tack on to a business trip in the region. But I've spent very little time in Germany, and even on one of those short trips that I had when I was in Frankfurt, I was able to go out to some of the villages where some of my known ancestors came from and walk around in those towns. And it was just amazing. And I would love to be able to spend like 3, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months doing doing that. But I just haven't had the opportunity. I traveled to so many other parts of the world, but haven't been able to spend the time there.
Okay. Number 9. What is something that you're afraid of?
Screwing my kids up. Like that's like my big fear in life is like being a parent is really intimidating. I mean, I love it. Toughest job you'll ever love. But like, oh, there's so many things that you can't control,
Yeah.
right? Like you
Yeah.
just got to set them on the right path and hope for the best.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you. It is scary. Yeah. All right, last question. What job other than one that you have had would you love to have?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think I would like to be Indiana Jones, and go around the world and fight Nazis and discover ancient artifacts. Or considering that that job's already taken, I guess. I mean, in all seriousness, I would like to be like an archivist, or a librarian in like a special collections section of a library. 'Cause I love old manuscripts and old um, it, you know things in other scripts, which I think is also part of what like has drawn me to the international path. Like I love things in old German script. I love things in Arabic script. I love things in the Cyrillic script. I mean, that variety of human expression, I just fascinates me, and so I could spend hours and hours and hours in a archive or in a library just doing that.
Well, David, thank you so much for agreeing to come up here on the front porch. What a fascinating conversation. I hope that what we talked about, some things we talked about, will let people think a little bit and open their eyes to different perspectives of this crazy world that we live in. But I just thank you for the work that you do and keep doing it. And geez, maybe I'll have you back on. I'd love to do an episode sometime that's like a uh, intro to like religions, where I'd have like you could speak about like the basics of what's Islam, and then I could have one of my friends that's Jewish speak about the Judaism. So I'll keep that in mind, and if that ever comes to fruition, you're getting a phone call from me right away.
Sounds good. You know
So
where to find me.
you got it. Thanks so much, David, and we'll talk soon.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Maidenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. 5 stars only, please. Follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. Also, please feel free to tell all of your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on my front porch.